Here I'm going to show you how to rehydrate some dry clay. I put my bag inside a bucket so that it would be, so that when I add water to it, it won't spill out of the bag. So there could be holes in your bag. So I put it inside something just in case there's leak, so you don't get your table wet. One thing I wanted to show you also is that in my bucket here, you can see that the clay has settled to the bottom. So if you have a bucket that you're using and you want to get rid of the clay or let it dry out so that you could clean it or whatever the case might be, you could dump that clear water into the sink. But if you notice, it's starting to get kind of cloudy as it's spinning around. So now the clay is mixed in to the water, so you do not want to dump that down the drain. But I could use this to rehydrate my clay. So I'm just gonna start pouring a little bit of this clay water in it and let it kind of soak in to the clay that is there. So I have a couple bowls that are pretty dry, or they're bone dry. But I don't want to have a lot of standing water. I want to let the water kind of absorb into the clay that's here. So I'm just going to let that sit for a little bit and come back to check it out. So I'll set this aside. Also, my little slip container, if I don't use it for a long time, the pieces start to dry out. So you could, dump this into here so that you could add a little bit more clay to it and then start fresh for your slip. You can see that there is some water in here, and I'm just letting it soak into the clay to get absorbed. I'm going to put this one on top, and it's starting to soak in, so I'm going to add a little bit more, and just adding a little bit at a time. So I'm going to let that sit. So the water is starting to absorb into the clay, so I'm just moving it so that the big chunks of clay, see, these are starting to get softened and break apart really easily, but it's not quite ready yet. There's still some dry, so the water really has to absorb. So I'm just gonna kind of squish it all in. It gets messy. So the clay is starting to get a little squishy, but there are still some really hard chunks in there. So I'm just gonna start closing up the bag a little bit and really smash up the chunks so that the drier clay that's inside will absorb some of the moisture. So I'm just smushing up the chunks. I'm gonna wrap it tight so it can really hold in the moisture and try pushing down while the bag is still closed. So I periodically just come by and start squishing the harder parts together and trying to let the drier clay that's on the inside break up and absorb some of the moisture. So when I open up this bag, you can see that it's super messy. Like sloppy. So I want to, and there's still some drier pieces in there, so I want to make sure that the moisture is equalizing in it so that all the little drier pieces are getting some of the moisture. So I just want to squish it all together. It's a lot easier to do it in the bag, like it's cleaner. You won't get as messy, but it's also difficult to get some of those pieces broken up. So you can see that some of the pieces of clay, you know, there's hard pieces in it. So I can't use this clay until I get a nice homogeneous consistency of the clay. So that means, you know, it's still a little dry. So I'm going to add a little bit more water, just a little bit. And I want to break up the pieces so that everything is equally moisturized. So I'm going to cut into to allow these drier pieces to break them up and allow a little bit of water to reach them. And I'm just basically going to sprinkle some water in there. I don't want to add too much water because I don't want a huge mess, and it could also take a lot longer to make it usable again. So I'm going to just break these up and really just lightly sprinkle some water in there. So just a little bit. And now close the bag up. And squeeze. Now I'm going to leave it overnight. So now it's the next morning and I am opening up my clay bag. And the sides get really dirty with all of that wet clay. So that can be kind of dried off and wedged into the clay. So now I want to try wedging it. So if you have to use a plastic bag, it's just going to be a little dirty. I'm just going to use the table, and you can see that there is some clay dust on it already, which that's fine. It's just going to get wedged into the clay. So the idea of this is that you're going to really just try to make it a homogeneous ball of clay. There's still some drier chunks in it, so I want to really try to get it all mixed in really well. So you can kind of push in like this to mix it up, and wedging. So use the heels of your hand and roll it around. So it's getting a little bit better as far as not as many dry chunks in there, but it's not perfect yet. So I'm going to keep wedging. Nice new ball of clay.